Unfortunately, you've almost got to be your own investigator these days. It was immediately you may not always recognise the significance of a piece of evidence, but keep it, and then over time it may become apparent. They may be significant than what it is at first sight. Just you be the person that turns up with all your handwritten notes that are dated and are proper against someone that hasn't, and you are already quite comfortably ahead of them. You have to have some determination, and although you are giving an account to the police, at the same time you can be doing exactly the same. Don't rely on the police to make an accurate account, and you don't be put off by a lack of response. You have to keep trying. There seems to be, or there certainly is, a theory that if you ask for a solicitor, I'm already think they might think I'm guilty. Why do I need a solicitor? Get that out of your mind. You need a solicitor there. But all through my uniform career, which actually was between 18 months and 2 years, I never fitted into that. I never fitted into the parking style ticket of policing, or the chucking out after hours and the club fights and all the rest of it. That wasn't me. There's people that love it. I never loved it. My heart was always in CID, and I liked what I saw on CID, although it was based on what I'd seen off the telly. That's what I wanted to do. So very, very quickly passed the exam to get into CID. Done that, worked in regional CID for approximately 4 years, before I then was asked to transfer, asked to go on secondment to the Met to work on an operation called Operation Overt. Operation Overt is widely known as the biggest investigation that the country's ever undertaken, and concerned the plot to blow up 8 aircraft over the Atlantic simultaneously, taking off from the UK, and they were now Al Qaeda based faction. So I went up there and worked on that. Halfway through that, because I was on it for 3 to 4 years, just one investigation. Halfway through that, I was asked to transfer to the Met, so I went into the Counter-Terrorism Command. From there, I had little impacts on things like the Tiger bombings. I then went into the inquest into the 7/7 bombings atrocity, and I also then that was 2 or 3 years. Then went on to the public inquiry into the death of Alexander Litvinenko, which essentially was a complete review. I mean, we're not going to have a trial in that job, but that essentially was the public inquiry into the murder of that man, and it was run as though it was the trial, if you like. Bearing in mind that we're never going to get the 2 people responsible back, or at least 2 people. There's probably more than 2 people responsible for that, but the 2 people we know of doing that. So after that, I'd had a very good run of things. It was a terrific place to work, but I felt like I'd worked on high-profile jobs, and I thought I'd had the best of it. And there were things going on within the Met that things had changed. The Counter-Terrorism Command had changed from going from 300 people up to 3,000 people. It had become a force in its own right. It had lost the personal touch. At the time, the work concerned people going to Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, for just people that were leaving to join the factions over in those countries, and they became an investigation in their own right. So if you can understand that in the majority of cases, they're never going to come back. And it was there was a limited powers investigation. And in terms of what was happening in this country, terrorism, it hadn't gone quiet, because there's always things going on in the background, but there hadn't been a significant attack, thank God, for a long, long time. So I thought, I've done what I need to do. I don't want to be in here for another 25 years, or what it would be. So I left and joined sports regulation.
So when was that, Nathan? When did you leave?
2018.
Right. So that brings us up to date, more or less, now, doesn't it?
Brings us up to date. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the training like? Was it good, do you think, when you actually did it, Nathan?
In terms of as a basic police officer, in terms of counter-terrorism?
In terms of counter-terrorism, were you really the creme de la creme kind of training?
Absolutely magnificent. So there There'll be courses where you go and train with the SAS in terms of anti-hijack techniques, driving skills, negotiations, those sort of things. There's maritime training where they turn you upside down in a fake helicopter in a swimming pool. And they have anti-piracy. The training there is absolutely, it's world class. And there will be people that disagree because unfortunately we do have atrocities in this country still. But I'll bow to no one in terms of our counter-terrorism unit, in terms of the intelligence, in terms of the investigation. To me, a world-class and best in the world by far.
And the leadership was good?
The leadership was good, but it did change as times changed. There were people there that were formidable in their role. And we talk about, the Met now, I think we may talk about it later, where there were women who were formidable in their role. Lisa Harman, Pam Mace, Steph Roberts, Anne Lawrence, who were not just there to fill numbers. They were good, and it was a place where if this makes sense, when you used to join to go into counter-terrorism command, you had to be. I don't want to say some but you had to be of a certain standard to get in there.
Yeah.
I think now that certain standard is probably 30% of what it used to be.
Right.
And I think the way they behave, and we used to, it wasn't unusual to work for 2 months on the trot. It wasn't unusual to do that with a day off here or a day off there. And if you take some jobs, which were in central London, where you had to work all those things, like Marks and Spencer's would let you in and give you shirts and pants and socks and all the rest of it because you needed them and you hadn't been home, and they were, very beneficial, and it was good. And the money you get as a police officer, so if you're a detective constable, a detective sergeant, or a detective inspector, well, it doesn't matter if you're in uniform or in the counter-terrorism branch, you get the same money. There's no increase in salary for going into that. You all get the same. You get different benefits. I've travelled internationally. You have these things called actions. So that is your work for the week. And they'll say, right, go out and do them. And they could be anywhere. They could go all over the country, sorting out things, taking statements, making inquiries. You had a corporate credit card. You had your expenses. You're going to stay in hotels and all the rest of it. And it all had to be reconciled at the end of the month and all the rest of it. But it was a good job, and it was a job where people did look up to you, and it was thoroughly enjoyable. But it did tail off.
Well, you sound proud of what you've done, and that's important, I think, with jobs. If you like the job and you do it well and you're proud of what you've done, it's a good thing, isn't it?
And you're in a good team.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it is a good team, and not there were not so good teams, but I was very, very, very lucky to be part of a decent effort, and just to sort of make it. It's almost like a little police force. It has its own exhibit section. It has its own computer section. It has its own intelligence function, completely separate to the rest of the Met. And it has its own MIR room and all the rest of it. So it is absolutely sort of like an own minor police force in middle of London.
Tell people what MIR is.
Major incident room, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
So we needed to bring you down to a rather low level though, Nathan, because I think most of the people that might listen, their involvement with the police is going to be on the basis of like an ordinary citizen, or they're involved in some kind of scandal or fraud or conspiracy of some sort, and the police are involved to try and investigate that, which is a little bit lower level than what you're used to. But on the other hand, you've got a lot of experience I think will help people to understand how they should understand what the police are doing when they're being interviewed, what the police are trying to achieve in terms of gathering evidence and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So
go on.
Well, could we start with what is evidence then, Nathan? A very basic question.
It's a basic question, but it's a good one. Evidence is anything. Anything can be potential be evidence, but there's good evidence and bad evidence and not. So with the thing about evidence, it's provenance. Can you be assured of where it's come from, and continuity. So if you can take it from a police investigation, if you go and search a house, you find a piece of evidence, maybe that's a credit card. That credit card gets logged in an exhibit book, in an exhibit handler's notebook. It then gets written on and sealed. You then need to provenance how that credit card has then gone from there to the exhibit store. So there's going to have to be a note of that.
Yeah.
Then when you get it out, you have to sign for it and seal it every single time. So you have to, that piece of evidence, that credit card in this instance, has to have credibility, and you have to know where that has been at all times. It's when there's gaps in that chain of continuity where you are going to struggle, or where people do. So at the minute, in the world we live on, things are sort of automatically time stamped, aren't they? So you get a text message, or you get a phone call, or you get a tweet, or you get voicemails or whatever. That is really, you know, it's excellent evidence. It's happened at the time. Now, in terms of maybe you've heard something during a phone call, or in terms of maybe you need to make a note of something, that might seem, you know, quite a basic level, and that you've written it down, and people might say, well, what good's that? You know, you could have done that any time. Well, what I'd say to that is just you be the person that turns up with all your handwritten notes that are dated and are proper against someone that hasn't, and you are already quite comfortably ahead of them.
Yeah.
You know, you have got something that you have been maintaining all over the days, months, and weeks against somebody that hasn't. You're in a far better position. And you might be challenged over them, but that's fair enough. Let people do that. But it's note taking and making sure that everything is absolutely precise. And also, when I say that anything can be absolutely evidence, don't be flippant about what impact a piece of evidence can have. When, you know, I know a job, for instance, where a gym card, something absolutely innocent, proved association with someone else, that sort of went off in a tangent just simply because it was. Immediately, you may not always recognise the significance of a piece of evidence, but, you know, keep it, and then over time it may become apparent, you know, they may be significant than what it is at first sight.
So most people, when they find themselves in a difficulty, think that simply telling somebody that there's a difficulty is evidence.
It absolutely is.
But so how far does that go, though? Is that enough?
It would. I mean, to me, that would, something like that would start an investigation rolling. You're going to start an investigation from somebody's account of an offence, and that sounds very much like that. You know, if you're going to try and get the police's, and I don't want to say the interest in something, you're going to have to keep going. You don't be put off by, you know, a lack of response. You have to keep trying. You have to keep going, because you will get rejected. You know, in terms like that, people might not be calling you every day. People are busy and all the rest of it. And we're in a society at the moment where, you know, things are not taken as seriously as what they should be. And that's a fact. And I'll give you examples about that. But you have to have some determination. And although you are giving an account to the police, at the same time, you can be doing exactly the same. Don't rely on the police to make an accurate account of what you've said. Have that as well there. You also should be accounting for, you know, the individual bits of evidence. If we're talking like an harassment case there, everything you can get needs to be compiled, because you can guarantee that the person, the defendant or the accused, whatever, they won't be doing that. You need to be taking account for that, and you need to be gathering evidence gathering.
And it would be right, wouldn't it, Nathan, to say if you turned up at a police station and you just said, well, I'm being followed and I've been followed 3 times, that's not really going to it's not very helpful, is it? You need to think, when did it happen? You know, what is it? Who is this person that's following me? How did I meet them? You know, you need to pad this story out. So I don't like having to say this, but I think in many respects nowadays, you almost have to sell your story to the police to get them to do something. And you have to make sure they're more interested in your case than somebody else who comes through the door, who hasn't really written anything down, who's saying I'm having a terrible situation going on, but who isn't able to really produce anything that can back them up at the moment. Would that be a fair thing to say, or do you think I'm being unreasonable?
No, I think you're being reasonable. I don't think you're being unreasonable. I think it's accurate in some cases, but at the same time, if you are going to the police and you're going to the person behind the desk and you're not seeing a police officer, and all you've been given is this crime number which someone's going to come back to and all the rest of it, if things are not moving fast enough for you, send it up the chain. Go. You know, I'm saying the chief constable, because I don't think, and sometimes chief constable just says, yeah, send it down. But sergeants, inspectors, DCIs, all those things. As soon as I don't want to sound anti-uniform, but I know how uniform works. As soon as that officer will get something from a higher level, from a hierarchy downwards, they will get moving on it. That's what you've got to understand, is that uniform officers, if they get allocated a job, generally they'll work too early, too late, 2 nights, and maybe 4 days off. Now, the nights, they're not going to do any inquiries on it. The lates, you might be struggling. You've probably got 2 days out of 10 where an officer in charge of your case is going to progress it. And that's not on. Now, what they should be doing is passing it on to the next relief, or they should be passing it on to another officer on a different section to try and follow that through. But the reality is, so many times, and I'm still hearing it now, is where a uniform officer will say, too busy to deal, major incident, too busy to deal, and they won't pass it on. And this is getting your interest in a case is difficult. Don't worry about it. And I've been a victim of crime since I've been living, here for the last couple of years. I had a wallet stolen with a debit card in it. That debit card was used probably 30 minutes after I realised it, and I'm getting text messages through from the bank saying you've been used 3 times, it's been blocked. The police done nothing, and I said to them, they said, look, we can't prove that the person using the card is the same person that stole it. And I'm saying, well, it's 30 minutes on, and even if you're telling me that's true, which I don't believe it is for a minute, isn't it worth the intelligence that there's someone doing these things, bearing in mind the shot that was used is 5 minutes from the nick? Send a PCSO, look at the CCTV. Don't you want to know that? Mm. But unfortunately, we're in a period at the minute that unless you are getting onto the aggravated offences and the serious indictable only offences, your service from the police is going to be limited.
Aggravated offences and indictable offences. People aren't going to understand that.
Indictable only is something where you're going to go to, it's something where you're going to end up in Crown Court.
Yeah.
It's something you're going to go around Crown Court over. When I say that, but burglaries, unless they turn up and there is and there is a sign of, if you've got DNA, fingerprints, whatever, if there's no sign of that, even an entry, they will not be looking at tool marks anymore. We used to go and say, right, how have they got in here? Is it a chisel, screwdriver, whatever? And we'll take that and we'll go back and we'll see if we can match it up. That won't happen. It's everything is just move on to the next one, move on to the next one. Can we solve it? And if it's taking too much effort, it won't happen.
So how do you get around that? If you want your own situation to be paid attention to, you can pester the more senior person, I suppose.
Do not be afraid. Don't be afraid to be a pest about it. Keep going, and you might get rejected. But make that officer who's the OIC, the officer in the case, make that officer who's got it, who is not treating it as he should be, make him suffer, for want of better ways. Bombard him with stuff. Make sure he's doing his job, because they will all too often they will try and get rid of you and try and just brush you off. Don't let it happen.
So somebody who's keeping a record of everything that happens, if it's daily or weekly or whatever, making good records, producing anything else that they can in support of what they're saying, like text messages or, notes or whatever, is going to be seen by a police officer as perhaps very difficult to turn that person away, whereas somebody who perhaps just talks about it might be turned away. Would that be reasonable?
It's certainly possible. But even if you turn up with your dossier of all your evidence, your note taken, we're talking about a hypothetical police desk, but you still might not get the response you want.
No.
You've still you do not put faith in that the wheels of justice are gonna turn in your favour and everything's going to be all right.
Yeah.
And the instance where you put to me just a minute ago, where someone was followed 3 times, I could think of probably 10 different ways of dealing with that. And on one of those occasions, the worst is going to happen to that person. And it's not going to be taken as it should do. But unfortunately, a lot of it is to do with cuts. A lot of it is to do with culture. A lot of it is that you'll hear police say, and this isn't a police bashing podcast by any means, but you'll hear a phrase in the police and they'll say, crock of shit. It's a crock of shit. And that is something you'll hear, I'd reckon, in every police station over the country, where there's sort of an arrogance where people can think they can look at a job and think, not dealing with that, or this is this, or they're pigeonhole someone in that sort of way. And unfortunately, you've almost got to be your own investigator these days. There are crime reports. Is there CCTV? No. Is there an eyewitness? No. Are there any injuries? No. And that's, well, is there DNA? No. Where do we go with it? And there's sort of solvability factors, for want of a better phrase, where if they don't tick the boxes, then that'll get filed. And if you're doing that, and if you're the one collating the evidence, you stand a far better chance. When I worked in Sussex will be made up of 6 areas: Brighton, East Downs, which covers Eastbourne essentially, Hastings area, Chichester area. It's a big division. If you work on East Downs like I did when I was in Sussex, the mindset of police is that, our person who committed this crime on us cannot possibly be from Brighton. They cannot possibly be from Hastings. They cannot be from Chichester. And it works exactly like that. You do not look outside. You do not look outside the box at all. If you're a villain and you're intent on doing that, then if you worked in Sussex, you do things sporadically. And I'll tell you what, the intelligence failure would be massive. And it's all to do with targets. There's fights. There's fights and internal squabbles over, did that burglary take place on the Eastbourne boundary or the Hastings boundary? Because if it's Eastbourne, that's one of our crime figures. If it's Hastings, let's get rid of it.
Oh, my goodness.
That is how it works. That is how it works.
So they're fighting over not doing the work as well, in a way, I suppose.
God, yeah. Absolutely.
So what happened if they committed the robbery in kind of on one side and then they ran into the other? They're kind of going to get away with it, are they?
If they commit a robbery on one side, it's not. I'm not explaining myself well. If you're in the midst of a chase, then you're fine. You'll be chased and you'll be caught and whatever. If you committed a robbery in Hastings, you happen to live in Eastbourne. If you live in Eastbourne, your chance of getting away with it are higher than if you lived in Hastings, because the blinkers will be on.
We can't publish this.
I don't think we ought to know.
People in Hastings will be watching.
Tell anyone. We certainly don't want the burglars to know, do we?
They'll be nipping across the borders all the time. You'll have
nominals. You'll have Hastings nominals, Eastbourne nominals, and that'll be it. They're from Eastbourne. They're committing crime on us, and that'll be it.
It's terrible if that's what they're doing.
It is. Yeah.
Nipping across to do their crime.
The other thing I don't think people understand either, Nathan, is if you're in a car chase, you're going through lots of counties, aren't you? And you're suddenly way away from your boss and you're in other people's areas. And then that gets even more difficult, doesn't it? Because you're...
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, God, yeah. But if you look at an intelligence system, I was part of getting together an intelligence investigation system for the counter-terrorism command so we could share intelligence. I don't know if it would come as a shock to you or not, but I'm on the computer in Sussex and I'm looking at intelligence. I cannot look at any other force at all. So if that person is coming from, Cornwall, Devon, Norfolk, whatever, I've got no idea what's happening there. I can look on P&C and see people's previous offences, but I can't. In terms of intelligence, let's say there's a man with a red hat, black shorts, and a yellow top that's been done 20 burglaries in the last month. Well, if he's doing it in Norfolk, I'm not going to see that.
Even if he's turned up in Sussex in his red hat and everything.
But then I've only got one burglary.
You've only got one burglary. You don't connect it. Yeah.
No.
That's amazing, isn't it? Clearly, the expectation is that there's a shared resource for intelligence services. I mean, internationally, or whoever's party to some agreement. But that seems a world away from not being able to know that the Norfolk burglars slipped over into Cornwall for a holiday and done a bit of burglary. I mean, you got software like Palantir, which is supposed to be weaving together all sorts of information about.
That's in the US, though, isn't it?
Well, presumably, but it's not limited, is it? It's going to be worldwide, isn't it? Which seems to be able to go across borders and across agencies, and yet you've got this other thing going on where people aren't even looking across a border 20 miles away.
Well, I suppose you've got these
bizarre.
elite groups. You were in an elite group, and they just get all the attention and all the money, don't they? Because finding terrorists has to be our main priority, doesn't it? And
it doesn't. And most of that information, let's face it, generally you only get arrested for terrorism once, and that's because you've been followed for 2 or 3 months, and the case is basically there by the time the knock on the door has come. But also you've got MI5, MI6, the services. A lot of our intelligence has come from there, and that's nearly that's certainly where every big job starts. So we get that, but I can't see how hard it would be for someone to put someone's name, date of birth in the computer. You can see that intelligence exists, and then you phone up that force and say, look, I'm interested in this for X, Y, Z. Can you tell me what it is? And if it is, release it. I can't understand what's wrong with that, or what's so difficult about that. But it doesn't happen. You can ask forces, but you have to have sort of the grounds and the knowledge to start with, or the suspicion that they're in a certain area.
And you presumably didn't have that problem with what you were doing, because people were facilitating the communications.
Yeah, we did. It works in a completely different way, and there are intelligence values. Don't get me wrong, and if there wasn't, we probably wouldn't have had the atrocities that we've had. But I can assure you that they've stopped.
And do you think
God knows how many never make the test?
And do you think the serious crime people share the same level of information sharing, or are they stuck with their local boundaries?
No, they're stuck with the local boundaries. If you look at the stuff, not generally, they're stuck with their local force, certainly. So most of the major crime units that I know would have homes, which is the Home Office large major inquiry system, where all inquiries are run on that, and then you can cross-check virtually every murder inquiry that's ever been on that. So if you're talking about London and the Met and however many boroughs it might be 26, you can see all those for the major crime, and that includes intelligence, investigations, everything. It's for the stuff that falls below that, like sometimes a burglar will be a major crime if he's a particular pest, and it is a major crime in my book. But generally, if he is floating around, you're not going to find him.
And who decides that it gets kicked up to that higher level?
Generally, you've got the certain commands. You've got MIT, murder investigation teams. That will all have homes. Anything of like robbers, bank robbers, people that have threatened lives, gang activity, those sort of things. Yeah. Maybe even not gang activity, but those sort of high profile cases, rapes, serial sexual offences, those sort of things.
So what's the best kind of evidence, Nathan? Is there a best kind?
If you're talking about, in custody and you've got a burglar, and you may say you've got a DNA hit or a fingerprint, I think we'll talk about solicitors later. You wouldn't disclose, for example, that fingerprint is on the outside of the house on a letterbox. You wouldn't disclose that as an officer. However, if you have got a fingerprint in the house and it's a burglary, that's perfect. If you have got, in terms of sexual assaults, if you have got, semen, bodily fluids, if you have got CCTV, if you have got, like I said, the time-stamped stuff, the tweets, the text messages, the voicemails, you can't go anywhere with that. That is your strongest evidence. If you found stolen property in someone's house, all those things, they're golden nuggets. In terms of surveillance, and if you're looking at product like that, and you've got people, you've got voice product, or you've got camera product, and you're following people, you're surveilling people, and you can find that sort of evidence. It's all very, very good. Yeah. But it all comes back to one point: can you provenance that? Has it got a start, a beginning, and an end? And if it has, then you're well on the way to having a strong piece of evidence. Where did it begin? Have you looked after it? Yes, I have. This is the final piece. So you can, from beginning to end, I can tell you where that exhibit has been, where it starts, and how it's finished. And that is one. Even if I do find a blood stain or a fingerprint or DNA in a house, I've still got to look after that, because if that goes wrong on the way to the lab, if that gets mixed up with another piece of evidence at the lab, it's worth nothing. It's worth nothing at all. So you need to look after what you've got. It doesn't just end when you walk in there and say, yes, got the I found the best piece. You're not going to know at the time. You're not going to know if DNA is particularly relevant until you've gone back and swapped it anyway. So that makes it even more relevant in many ways, in terms of, if we're looking at forensically looking after that evidence, because you don't know what it is when you first got it, and once it's been analysed, then it becomes that. But that's when a defence solicitor, as per their job, will interrogate how you got it, where it's been, and what you've done with it. We all know jobs. Russell Bishop, if you go back, Babes in the Woods murder back in the late 80s, clearly before I was a police officer, and fortunately the right verdict's been found out now. But there were fibres found on a jumper. Those fibres could have come from somewhere else. Straight away, unfortunately got out to it. He was released to do it again. So that person had to go through with that because of failings in the system. So it's the continuity of evidence is the most important thing for my.
Okay, can we move on to arrests and getting people into the police station?
Yeah.
Now, what's the right way for that to happen, so people understand what the police can do when they arrive at the custody suite, or whatever you call it, and what happens?
Well, essentially, if things have changed a little bit in the last few years, where there's become a sort of there's been change in the Bail Act, which means you'll hear more about people being invited to go to custody and not being arrested, as opposed to being arrested. So, but if we talk about an arrest, you're probably going to be arrested if they're looking to do some sort of search, if they're looking for phones, stolen property, those sort of things. Because if you walk into a police station without going to get a warrant, you've lost that power of search. If you get arrested, an inspector can sign up search for the Section 18 step. So that can happen. But I think the first thing, if you are arrested and it is new to you, is there seems to be, or there certainly is, a theory that if you ask for a solicitor, I'm already think they might think I'm guilty. Why do I need a solicitor? Get that out of your mind. You need a solicitor there, and don't think that your time in custody is a time for don't think it's a time for clever advocacy. Don't think it's time for someone standing on your feet and the ITV moment near the end and making clever speeches. It isn't. I don't think a solicitor can get you off, for want of a better phrase, in custody, but they can certainly stop you from saying things or doing things that are going to be detrimental to your future. So just say, if you off topic a bit, if you walk in, you'll be presented to a custody sergeant. The facts of the offence will be presented to you and your reason for arrest. The likelihood is you'll be searched, and to be quite frank, the likelihood is you're going to be DNA swab, photographed, and you're going to end up in a cell and two people are ready to deal with you. Now, as we talked before, if you're arrested at, let's say, 3 o'clock, and that shift changes at 4 o'clock, the likelihood is you're not going to be dealt with by the early turn. It's going to be the late turn, and if it's not the late turn and they're busy, it might be the night turn. So potentially you're there for 24 hours for a basic offence.
Because the clock starts ticking, doesn't it? That's the other thing.
It does, yeah. The clock starts ticking, and there are ways you can extend the clock. But I don't think we probably need to sort of speak about those in a minute. No. But a solicitor will if you have a solicitor, number one, you get disclosure. So in my I've never heard someone that's been arrested and not been represented ask for disclosure. The disclosure is something that you're not entitled to exactly. You're entitled to a custody record, basically, in the circumstances of the arrest. But essentially, that is a conversation between the police and your solicitor that details what the job is about. From there, your solicitor will then talk to you about what the police case is and what your version of events are. So without asking for a solicitor, you won't be privy to those sort of things. Now, also, while I touch on this, you're likely to have, if you're not used to the criminal justice system, you're likely to be asked for just a duty solicitor. Duty solicitors, in my experience, they can vary, but most I'll be quite happy to have, quite frankly. Some of them are very, very, very good. Some of them will know the officers concerned in the case because they're doing it all the time anyway. sometimes there will be a relationship between the officer and the solicitor, and that might not be a bad thing, because they might have a conversation like, is this cautionable? Is this, are we looking at a charge here? And there's someone there fighting your corner, and there's things going on which you wouldn't get if you're stuck in your cell, and that is the important thing. And I think another important thing to get across for people that might be sort of new to the environment is that if you go into a consultation with your solicitor and you say, yeah, I'm bang to rights here, I've done it, but get me off, that isn't going to happen, or at least it shouldn't happen. But I think sometimes you have to sort of clear these things up. A solicitor cannot go out there and advocate for you if you've said you've done it. He will not say, right, I'll tell you what, we're going to get away with this one. That's not going to happen, and that's not what they're there to do. Has it happened? Have I been suspected that that's happened in the past? Absolutely, I have. But I don't think they're there, to get you off. They're there to advise you legally. So after you've had a consultation with a solicitor, the likelihood is you'll be interviewed, you'll be cautioned. Part of that caution will say you do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence. You do not mention now something you may later on in court. That essentially what they're trying to get across to. This is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to tell the truth, get it all off your chest, and everything will be okay. Not unfortunately, that's sort of overplayed in many ways. You'll see signs up around the police station saying an early guilty plea will get you discount. An early guilty plea will go in your favour, something along those lines. When the reality is, that is covering the no comment interview. So if you're asked by a solicitor, if a no comment interview will generally come, and I am generalising here, is when the client is absolutely bang to rights and there's no point in saying anything because you're just gonna get yourself further in it, or you've done it and there isn't any evidence and there's no point in giving anybody any help, or indeed maybe you are innocent but you don't want to implicate somebody else. Those are sort of the three main reasons where I can think of. But if you are asked to go no comment or you're advised to go no comment in an interview, or you're advised to make a prepared statement is essentially a paragraph or two about where you were and what your defence is, what your alibi is, for want of a better phrase. If you're asked to do that, don't worry about it. It may feel unnatural to answer no comment. It may think you're being evasive. You're not. People are used to it. Don't be worried about doing it, and the police officer will ask you every question, or should ask you every question that they would have asked you as if you're answering the questions. And the reason they do that is because if you don't ask the question, you cannot draw an inference from it at court. So a judge or a magistrate may say, we can draw an inference from the fact you didn't ask the questions, straightforward questions, what you knew the answer to, despite the fact you were given a warning. If that question isn't asked, you cannot draw an inference from that. And just going off of topic for a bit, people will say, no comment, we can draw an inference. It may go against you at court. We may be able to draw an inference from it. I've never known in 20 years a judge draw an inference from a no comment interview, not when they've been legally advised. If you're there, it's the first time in custody, you've spoken to a legal advisor, an expert in their field, they've told you to go no comment. How is that your fault? It's not your fault. I've got this person next to me. This person is saying go no comment. That's exactly what I've done. I followed his advice. And it's overplayed the impact a no comment interview may have on a defendant. And in an interview room, they'll come out with all the hackneyed things. They might pull the table. It's not like a face-to-face. We can't stare at people over the interview room. We might move the chairs so they're like, 20 to 1 or whatever it is. We don't want any gaps in the middle. We want an open space. They'll be looking at you to fill the gaps. They're trying to make you feel uncomfortable. Well, in actual fact, if you have a good solicitor, if you have a solicitor that is not feared but is formidable in their role, it's the police officer that will be made uncomfortable, because they don't want every time that I speak to somebody now, or every time I speak to someone in the past, I want a solicitor there. And because I know all I'm doing is asking questions, and if I'm going out of the realms of what I should be doing, maybe not intentionally, or I'm asking things that maybe aren't fair, then I think it's right I get pulled up. I still have the obligation where I can still ask those questions. I can say, well, actually, no, that's a fair question, Mr. or Mrs. Solicitor. That's fair, and I'm going to ask it. But it's good that it's not objectivity, but you have someone there who is testing, what you're doing. And then if it comes into it from a police point of view, if we're looking at a court date, 2, 3, 4, or years down the line, it is now, everyone was there. It was handled fairly. There's no problem with the interview process. And I think it's important. And not only, the fact if we go outside the interview procedure, if you have a solicitor with you, the chances of you being left in custody for 12, 14 hours, they're not erased, but they're diminished, because you've got someone in the custody sergeant's ear saying, he's been here for 2 hours, she's been here for 3 hours, 4 hours, this is not acceptable. You've got someone fighting for you. It doesn't cost you a penny. And all the time they're helping. At the end of the procedure, there may be a refusal of bail. Now, I've never known a solicitor in custody been able to change the custody sergeant's mind about whether someone's going to get bail or put before the court. But they're still doing that for you. And I think it's important. And I'll tell you another instance where is the impact on a caution of somebody's life. If someone says you're going to get cautioned for an offence, and they might say, you don't need a solicitor, just get a caution or whatever. It will happen. Believe me, it will happen. And they won't be legally represented because they want to get it over with. They want to get out, and we can deal with this. Well, that officer may not have been to the custody sergeant yet to authorise that caution, and you may have admitted to something you didn't need to admit to. That officer may now go to the custody sergeant and say, right, can we caution this bloke or this woman? I can't leave anyone out tonight. They'll get hammered. You need to, and he goes to the custody sergeant and says, well, can we caution it? The custody sergeant says, no, that needs to be charged. All of a sudden, that ball's rolling, and you think you're going to be out there in, a couple of minutes, when in actual fact, next week you're at Highbury Magistrates Court. Those are the things where you need to have a solicitor there for. You absolutely need to have them.
So if these arrangements where people aren't arrested but they're invited to the police station, what do you make about, what can you make of that? How would you deal with it, Nathan?
There doesn't seem any reason for me why you wouldn't have. Again, I'd be seeking a solicitor without doubt.
Yeah.
The good thing about it is it'll be done at a time, and it's going to be taken. You're not going to be taken into a cell. You're going to be taken into an interview room. You won't be arrested. You'll be interviewed under caution, so it'll all fall under a very, very similar umbrella. But the timing of the things, it's much more civilised the way it's done. But if that was to happen, number one is it probably wouldn't be for the most serious offences, or if it is for a serious offence, it's probably occurred a long time ago where there isn't a real prospect, let's say, of evidence being available. Like if you haven't got any DNA from 5 years, 6 years ago, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
If you're being arrested for, let's say, I don't want to say anything to minor sexual offence, but an indecent assault where it's one word against the other, there isn't going to be a lot of point in searching your home. So we'll do an arrest under appointment. It's all because people have been on bail for far too long in the past, sometimes, up to 2, 3, 4 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And this now you'll see that you'll be released under investigation, which is something that's come in the last few years. I don't know when it came in, but in that instance, if I'm going to meet the police, I'll be taking a solicitor with me. You'll still be entitled to disclosure. You'll still be entitled to everything that you have normally, except it may be there'll be a bit more civility to it.
I know you know a little bit about the post office scandal. Having heard about some of those cases and what's been going on, Nathan, what would you say about the way that some of those postmasters have been treated?
It's hard to put it into context. It's hard to put it into words, to be quite frank. What I would say is that a lot of this has started, or not so, when someone's turned up at your door, and I don't think, or they certainly weren't told quite what the potential, how it's going to potentially going to be play out. No one thought when those people were knocking at the door that this interview could see me get 2, 3, 4 years in prison. Not a chance. if any regulatory power, if any regulatory organisation wants to speak to you, you can still be represented. And I don't think that certainly was not explained.
No.
And at the very start, it's just I don't quite know, and maybe this is going on in the background, I don't know. But I've seen some of the cases you put up on your podcast. I've seen some of the people interviewed. I've done a little bit of research about myself. And what I can't see is that there's any ramifications for the people that have pushed these things through. You know, for the people that say, I know a liar when I see one. For the people that say, you know, this is all going to be over. Just put your hands up and you're just going to. I think maybe even a caution might have been mentioned then, or something along those lines. There was no sign of you're going to end up in Crown Court. You know, that isn't. It's just preying on the innocence of people, and by definition, if you're, I don't know what vetting checks take place if you have to run a post office, but I should imagine you have to be
thoroughly checked. Yeah, you wouldn't have any previous convictions, otherwise you wouldn't get the appointment. So,
and there lies the problem, where you're dealing with people that have no idea about the criminal justice system. And if you look at private prosecutions, if you look at the success rate in private prosecutions, they are high. And I'll tell you what, there's not as many gaps for it to fall down. The process is you get your case, you take it, and it's prosecuted. There's not the areas where it might fall down, as in a criminal prosecution. And some of the stories of it, this isn't 2 or 3 people that have come unstuck here. We're talking 600-700. Now, if that's the police investigating that, if they'd known about that, and I'm pretty certain they would, I don't ever think that would happen. I don't ever think that those people would be convicted, because police are notoriously bad at speaking to other forces about certain things. However, by definition of 700 offences, there must be 50 or 60 in a particular force where you think, well, how has this happened? And you do get a feeling for someone. It's not, people have had me over with the truth plenty of times, don't worry about it. But you do have a feeling, you do have sort of a sense of, this just doesn't sound right to me. And if you look at the post office jobs, what's the most important thing in that job? Where's the money?
Yeah.
Where is it? You've stolen 50, 60. Well, where's it gone?
Yeah.
It will. There are inquiries that ought to have sorted that out very, very, very quickly.
Well, they were asked to provide all the information about what bank accounts they held, or building society accounts. The people that we've spoken to did that. I presume that the inquiries were made. Nobody has ever told us that there was any money anywhere other than money that they could prove was legitimate.
Yeah.
So they were making those inquiries. They weren't finding, £60,000 in someone's deposit account somewhere, not that we've heard of anyway. And wouldn't you start to wonder, wouldn't you begin to think, well, what on earth have they spent it on? Where's it gone?
You can't just lose. It's almost impossible to lose that sort of money. It has especially when it's come from that source. It's come from the way they're alleging that it's happened. From an overtake or undertake or whatever it is. Over a significant period of time. I mean, if you looked into the background of these people, have they got financial issues? No, they haven't. Are they of good standing? Yes, they are. Have we surveilled them for 3 or 4 weeks just to see if they've got another bank account here? Have the regulatory powers that are investigating that? Have they got sufficient powers even to deal with it? Are they able to get authority forms to have a look at banks? Can they get mobile phone download records? Of course, you can get all these things if you go to court if you want to spend the money on. But did they even bother? I don't know. Mm. And I think the striking thing is, and I apologise, I can't speak to I can't remember the lady's name, but there was one lady that took 70 members of her village there to a court hearing. The judge said, "What are you doing in my court?" The vicar is saying, whatever your opinion about vicars are. The vicar is saying, we need her back. If you're going to give her a jail term, please make it a short one. What if you haven't got 70 people in your village? What if you're the person that turns up at your house and then you just say, well, I've just given an interview and what will be, will be. And you sit there and you worry about it. And the next thing you know, you're summoned to court and you're looking at 2 years. All these things. Some people haven't got this backing. Some people haven't got the fortitude to say, no, you're absolutely wrong, or to challenge authority. And that is your absolute start the ball rolling on the miscarriage of justice. Mm. Is the fact that you're preyed upon for being naive, and your good character in the past is suddenly been to your detriment because all of a sudden you don't know anything about this system that they're bringing you into.
No.
And suddenly you've got a huge problem that, I've heard of a suicide. There's probably been more people have been bankrupt, selling their homes.
They've been ruined. Yes,
ruined. Yeah.
Because some people can't be able to investigate it properly.
Yeah,
it's an absolute scandal. Well, it is the post office scandal, but it should. We think we're a forward-thinking country. Believe me, there's things that are happening every day that you think, gee, how are we allowing that to happen? And it's not long ago. It's not long ago. It's all 10, 15 years ago. We're into the next century. We think things are improving. All the rest of it just shows you. It just shows you how your life can turn just by the ignorance and the inabilities of people to set out to investigate something they're not capable of doing.
Do you think there are some policemen or ex-policemen who would have loved the idea that nobody was asking for lawyers, that nobody was, equipped to really handle the way in which they were behaving? Do you think that, there are people that...
100%. 100%. And they do that is because they do not know how they're not confident in their role. If you're confident in your role and you know how to deal with a solicitor and you treat someone in custody with the respect they deserve and you treat everybody equally, you've got nothing to worry about at all. Nothing to worry about at all. But if we just go back to that custody thing in a minute, I'll tell you one piece of advice that I was given once, and I sort of want to get arrested to test it out because I know it'll happen. You'll have a uniform officer who will have his file, which will go everywhere with him in the custody block. He won't let it go. He'll take it and he'll take it into the interview room and he'll put it down and he'll get bits of paper out and not let you see all the rest of it. And I'll tell you one thing, that'll have your name on it. They'll have the name on it and the offence you're suspected of. And when those tapes start rolling, Don always says, this is what you should do. He said, excuse me, that folder you've got there, and they'll say, yeah, he said, can I have a look at it? And the answer will be no. I said, well, it's got my name on it. It's about me, isn't it? And they'll say no. And it'll just put them straight on the back foot, straight away. It's only a bit of a fun factor, but, it's the fact that everything should, you're not going to be disclosed everything, but it's sort of taking the power back a little bit from the people. And it's trying to identify the people that know their jobs from the people that don't. And if you know your job,
I was going to say, what would you think if now that you've said on this podcast that actually you're entitled to some disclosure, what would happen if as a person turning up being interviewed said, well, I'm not having I don't have a lawyer, but I hope they'd ask for a lawyer. Let's be clear about that. But if they still don't, what would happen if somebody said, well, you would tell a lawyer a little bit about what evidence you have and what you're going to be interviewing me about. So tell me now, what would happen, do you think?
I think you're perfectly entitled to get it. I've never known it. I've never known someone on their own. I could imagine someone that's been through the system a few times saying, well, I'll have disclosure, and whether it's treated the way it should. But this is where you go back to the no comment thing, is where if you're sitting there saying no comment without legal advice, I think that's to your detriment. Even if you don't want to listen to your solicitor, have one there because you can say, he told me to do it, or she told me to do it. If you're going off your own back and doing it and trying to be clever, which I have seen on a couple of occasions, you're losing the benefit, or you're losing the right not to say anything in my book. And I think an inference may be drawn in those circumstances. But you're not entitled to see everything. Of course you're not. You're not entitled to know about the whole job because it's to test the truth. Yeah. That's why you're being interviewed. It's to test the truth and test your account. And to withhold some evidence is expected, quite frankly. But then there will be times when you'll be told everything. If you've got someone doing a robbery, or if you've got someone in the middle of the street doing an act, and you've got CCTV, well, tell me about that. It's very hard to get out. To get out of that, and it's for up to them to mitigate. But there are plenty of occasions where people will not be told anything, and it's just like, oh, got you there. You didn't. Well, the reason you did is because you didn't tell me. And
if you are an innocent person, Nathan, I think it would also be reasonable to assume that. I mean, because I did crime for quite a long time as a solicitor, I think it's the law. You have a number of clients that you represent regularly. There are these people around in every court every day they know their way around a police station. They know their way around court. They know their way around prison, probably. And they do know the rules. And they're going to have a lawyer, aren't they? They're not going to say, I don't need a lawyer. They'll always have a lawyer, and they'll know the good ones as well, won't they? They'll be able to name the good ones.
They'll have their own. They'll have their own one, or they'll mention a firm. They'll say, "We'll have Tuckers." Routinely. Yeah, I know what's going to. I'll have them. Thanks very much. Or in the terrorism realm, right, Imran Khan, and then he'll be there, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So yes, they will. They'll know the game as well as anyone. Unless maybe there's a caveat there. Occasionally, when you're hardened criminal, I don't mean the proper ones. Maybe they've got a drug problem, alcohol problem. They're looking at 6 or 7 burglaries, whatever. They'll just say, look, just stick me in the nick. Just do whatever you need to. I need a clean slate. Just let's just get this over and done with. But generally, I think you're absolutely right.
And I mean, that's what innocent people should think about. If you're in a police station, do what people who generally are in the police station do, because they've had lots of practice at it.
It's like finding a good restaurant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Follow the locals.
That's absolutely true. Right.
And if you want to investigate your own problem and keep a record, do what the police do, which is to gather the evidence and guard it carefully and annotate everything and take it seriously, rather than thinking you can do it differently yourself because you're an amateur.
Yeah. And don't think, and also just while we're on the police custody side of things, and we've talked about cautions, being given, and cautions, they aren't a major thing, but they can have a major impact on your life. I've known people get knocked back for mortgages because they've got a caution. There are people that have been knocked back for jobs because they've got a caution. Don't be so keen to put your hands up to something that you really don't have to, just to get out of there, because it can have an impact in your life in the future in other ways other than the criminal justice system.
And of course, it will be presented often as, well, all you've got to do is say you've done it. Somebody's going to give you a telling off and then you're out of here. Yeah. And that sounds marvellous, doesn't it, really? But of course, they're not told the bit which is, but it can follow you around for your lifetime.
Yeah, it can. And also, they're not told the bit where if you're being offered a caution for a very, very minor offence, by the time that ends up at a magistrate's court, people might have lost interest in that. It might have fallen through the cracks of justice, and they're saying it's not in the public interest to run it. Yeah. You shouldn't have to think like that, but that's part of the game, isn't it? I don't know the percentages, but there'll be a significant percentage, probably not a majority, that between charging and going to either magistrate, being heard in magistrates or Crown Court, they won't get heard at all. There'll be a problem with there. Witnesses won't turn up. There'll be an issue of evidence. There'll be an issue of disclosure. And sometimes, and we've all seen it, people will wait until the day where you go to Crown Court for a trial. Defence will see that all the witnesses have turned up. Everything's where it should be. Plead guilty. You have to be of a certain disposition if you're the defendant in that position to wait 18 months with it over your head. But it does happen, and if people don't turn up that should turn up, the likelihood is you're going home.
Tell us a little bit about stop and search. What should people expect with stop and search?
I just think it's been. I think it's been abused in the past, and I'll tell you
by the police. You mean abused by the police? Yeah.
But firstly, it's an absolute vital tool. It's a completely vital tool. If you are out 11, 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning on a weekday, let's say, and you're walking around a suburban area, why wouldn't you ask me a question? Well, if you speak to someone and they're not giving you the answers that you think there's I'd completely understand that. I completely understand that, and I don't think that's an issue. I think the issue comes with is that the racial profiling is an issue, without a doubt, but also is the fact that there's a hackneyed phrase that police will use, and you've been found in an area of high crime. It's been an area of been known for burglaries. Now, I bet you quite a bit, if you actually went back and had a look, whether there's been any a peak in crime in those areas, there won't be. It's just a phrase that the police have got away with for years, and it's just their opinion of. It's just their way of going to the stop and search. It's not a nice thing to happen to someone, You know, you're there in the street and you're literally being, you know, you're being violated in some ways. But I think there's got to be a bit of proportionality in it. This might be because I'm a white male. I don't know, but I've never been even close to being searched. I don't know too many people that have. You know, the chances are of it happening to an ordinary person on an ordinary day, I think are very, very, very slim. I think that's the thing, is to get a reasonable deal of perspective about it. But if you are in the wrong place at the wrong time, if you are somewhere where there has been violence, if you are somewhere where if you've got a criminal record, that will probably go against you. It'll probably, you know, if you've got a known burglar walking through town at 1 o'clock in the morning, you need to be searching him. There's no doubt about it. Your reputation might be your downfall, because I want to know you've got a screwdriver in your pocket. I want to know that, you know, if you're in possession of stolen goods and all those sort of things. I think the public perception of stop and search has gone outside of what is actual reality, and I think that it's an absolute vital tool in the policing powers. You're not going to find knives. You're not going to find guns. Those are the things that you're generally looking for. Yes, stolen property is one thing, or whatever, but it's weapons of offence that you're looking for generally. Things that are going to do people harm, and I think we need it, but it just does need to be used proportionally, and it needs to be used at the right times, and it needs to be done. You know, you don't have to. If you're stopped anywhere, you don't have to be searched in the open. You can say, look, can we do this over here? We can do this more, you know, in a more discreet way. You know, it's all to do with the demeanour of the police and how they come across. And if you explained it, you know, if you explain what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, and you're right again. If you know your powers, that's the most important thing. If you know your powers as a police officer, you've got nothing to fear. It's when you're wigging it and you think, well, maybe do this, because you know, it will be measured. There will be target numbers of how many have got to be searched. Don't worry about it. You know, there will be target numbers for how many drink drivers or how many breath tests you've got to do or how many speeding tickets. There'll all be statistics to do it, and people will be working to these. So yeah, I think it's a vital tool. Is it being used disproportionately? In my experience, I've not seen that, but I don't really know where we'd be without it, to be honest.
There's another issue which I think is an interesting one, perhaps, which is about how the public expect the police to behave when you're dealing with a lot of very difficult people who will behave very badly towards you and towards other people. Of course, you know, they're a nuisance in the neighborhood, but they're horrible to deal with. And what the public expect in terms of politeness and measured behavior and so on. And that's a very difficult balance to strike. And I imagine many officers struggle with it.
They do, you know. And I may have been critical about the police in certain aspects in this interview, but one thing I will say is that when that, I know they're paid to do it, but when that call comes through, and you get that call over the radio, and you've got to go and deal with that man with the gun, or you've got to go and deal with that child that's 6 months old that's died in their cot, you can give every single bit of training you want. You haven't got the option of turning around and thinking, I'll get someone else to do that. You know, you haven't got that option of when you see 20 people in a pub fight and it's all going mad and you're going to get hurt, you know, but you want to save someone that's in the middle of it. You haven't got the option of turning a blind eye. And I think police are under enormous pressure. You know, you have to be impartial. That is part of your job. You're there to keep the peace. That's it. No one should be telling you what to do. No one's voice should be telling you. You know, if you're doing your job correctly, no one should be bullying you into anything. And I think what I've seen at the moment, and God, I cannot abide it, understand it, or just see how it's happened. When you see these anti-vaxxers going into hospital, you know, and handing out these legal documents that mean absolutely nothing, they are threatening staff. They're intimidating. They're committing an offence by being there anyway, in my mind. Now that needs strong policing. That needs people getting hold of that and stopping it. I'm seeing it over the country at the minute, where there's factions. It doesn't matter what group you are. There's a lot of people taking a lot of things into their own hands, and they're doing things. And I think, and I don't want to be too sensationalist about it, I think it's almost like a bit anarchic at times, but people are just doing whatever they want. And I think that has come from the police are now too scared to do anything. And I think that's a problem. And if you go back to, we do police by consent, and I was in the Met in the 2010 London riots. Now, I was working in counter-terrorism command, but let me tell you that every member of that force essentially was attached to the riots for a time being. They couldn't cope. It was for a couple of weeks, sustained, windows being smashed, looting, all the rest of it. I ended up in a control room in Lambeth, writing situation reports to the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary that were updated every 5 or 6. So I was out of that sort of direct contact, if you like, which I was thankful, to be frank. But you know where the London riots stopped? We had police officers coming in from several different counties because the Met couldn't cope. The only reason that those riots stopped was because judges were given the powers, not given the powers, but were told to go heavy on sentencing. Overnight, people were getting 6 months for nicking a bag of crisps, for putting their hand inside a window and coming out with, and that's a burglary. You don't have to be in the premises. If your hand goes in, you take a bit of property, that's a burglary. There were people getting 6 months for that. It stopped almost overnight because all of a sudden, the power was taken back. And when you talk about, it's going off topic a bit, but if you look at stronger sentencing, that is one area where stronger sentencing absolutely worked. Because you weren't going to stop it. The mob had taken over. The mob had completely taken over, and it couldn't be controlled. And the only way to do it was to get ordinary people, and it was ordinary people, and they went to prison. They paid a really heavy price for it.